general perception that model United Nations has been going downwards for quite some time. It's 2018, 2019, but they were no longer in 2020, completely unheard of ever since. So it's been going downwards ever since. 2020 and COVID-19 more specifically was a nail in the coffin.
Those kind of cases take place to cause, model SUNMUN itself to play it safe rather than, risk the disapproval of our administration.
Ayer estuvo el diablo aquí.
The United States has great strength and patience, but if it is forced to defend itself or its allies,
this, Mr. President, is the face of India's democracy.
We will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea.
Shame on you for doing that.
We don't.
Shame on you for glorifying terrorism.
U.S. military power must be our tool of last resort.
That fighting for women's rights has too often become synonymous with man-hating.
You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words, and yet I'm one of the lucky ones.
This has to stop.
So hi everyone, I'm Dhruvjeet. So welcome back to episode 2 of our brand new series Spotlight. So for this new episode, it is in conjunction with United Nations Day. And then that's why for the topic of today is on the model United Nations in Malaysia. For this episode, we've managed to invite 4 very prominent speakers, which are the significant icons of the Malaysian MUN scene, where we have the president from MUN Club, we have the president from Taylor's Lakeside Model Nation Club, we have the president from MCKLMUN Club, and we also have the vice president of SUNMUN Club.
All right. Hi. My name's Tracy. I am the current president of the Monash Model United Nations Society.
And a very good day to our viewers. My name is Daniel, and I am the current incumbent president of Taylor's Lakeside Model United Nations, currently studying as a second-year degree student.
Hi, my name's May, and I'm the vice president of the Sunway Model United Nations Club. I'm currently an A-level student at Sunway College.
Hi everybody. I'm currently the current president of the MCKLMUN Club, and I'm currently taking A-levels at MCKL.
Okay, thank you everyone. So the first question is, do you agree that we know what we are talking about when it comes to international affairs?
Essentially, when we talk about international affairs, given that we are, how does one put it, we are youths, and that in comparison to, say, an expert in the field, we will pale in knowledge. I would say my answer is I partially agree. My answer is I partially agree. Because the reality is we can never know everything. And fundamentally, we are not experts, but nevertheless, we always will retain a certain level of interest, particularly when it comes to a topic of our interest, and therefore we will be able to discuss it more in detail to understand it in greater detail. While, once again, one cannot claim to know everything when it comes to international relations, but nevertheless, we can always say that we are interested in a certain field and we're more happy to talk about it. So that's my take. I partially agree.
I have to agree with Daniel in this sense, because to an extent, in certain contexts, MUN does undermine diplomacy and the complexity of global politics. But what I believe it does is really inform students on how diplomatic functions are executed and how, certain decisions can impact, can have impact on a national scale, a regional scale, and a global scale. So while the dynamics of global politics can never be fully explored, it does give students like an idea on how decisions by, national leaders actually take place.
I agree with that as well. I partially agree in the sense that, in terms of what we know we're talking about, in terms of the fact that in the MUN ecosystem, you're sort of required to, have some awareness of what's happening around the world. I think it's just part of anyway, being aware is a massive part of, it helps you become also a good debater, and also a very aware and knowledgeable person. For you to, if you're unaware of what's happening around the world, you're not able to make inferences, conclusions, etc. So I think I partially agree to that sense, and I think that for you to succeed in the MUN ecosystem, for you to sort of enjoy it and really have an interest, knowing about like international affairs is an extremely important thing.
Yeah, I also partially agree with this notion, mostly because when we take part in activities such as Model United Nations, we are, basically depending on which council and what topics that are discussed in the council, we make, we do research that is more focused towards the topic. And if, let's say, as a delegate, I mainly take part in councils that involve economics and finance, of course, my knowledge would probably be stronger in that aspect, but that doesn't mean that akin to professionals in international relations and global economics, my knowledge would not be up to par to their level, and also it may not encompass as big of a range of the nuances and the intricacies when it comes to these kind of topics.
Okay, so it's a very interesting point is that the intricacy of the MUN scene, right? So you agree that it's not everyone inside the MUN scene that is as equipped as they say it is, that they are more aware. They know what they're talking about. Do you agree with that? Is that not everyone in the MUN scene?
Yeah, I agree that like not everyone in the MUN scene would have like a consensus of their beliefs and things like that. And at the same time, just because we play certain countries, we play the role of certain countries within councils doesn't mean that we necessarily take their stance. So for example, I can play a role as Saudi Arabia when it comes to issues pertaining to women, let's say in the United Nations Women's Council. And as Saudi Arabia, I may say things that are pretty conservative, especially in a religious sense. So, but that doesn't mean that that reflects my personal values. And I think that is also what a lot of the experienced MUNers would say as well.
So the second question is that Model United Nations is simply an educational activities, nothing beyond that. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I'd love to. So as an educational tool, MUN is, very, very effective, because how else would you be able to, engage students in global affairs without the use of, very heavy reading material or text that is, very conventionally used these days. But it is, so it is very effective at simulating actual diplomatic tools used by the United Nations and, other real international councils these days. But with helping students, engage in the nuances and dynamics of real global politics, it is a little more tricky, because at times, in certain contexts where members of a council may not possess that sort of diplomatic knowledge or political knowledge, they can undermine certain topics and certain discussions. So it very much depends on who is taking part in those discussions and whether or not they are equipped to engage themselves in those negotiations prior to taking part in the council session itself.
I somewhat agree with that, but in the general sense, it's definitely an educational tool in the sense that, it helps people participating attain essential skills, not just at that moment, but also in the future, in the workplace, potentially things like, being able to communicate effectively, being able to articulate your points or arguments effectively, and also being able to speak in front of a lot of people. That's not an easy thing for a lot of people, gaining self-confidence. I think that's very important, especially in the workplace. When you're looking for jobs, when you're going through interviews, those things are very important. And also in terms of, research, research is a fundamental part of a lot of things, being able to be good at researching things, finding out different things, different sources. Those are very important skills, especially when you go into the field of science, especially. Research is hugely important in that field. So I think it definitely, the MUN ecosystem definitely helps you to attain several skills that are essential for the future. I think that's why I think it's a very pertinent educational tool.
Well, I partially agree with this notion that MUN is just an educational tool, but it's also kind of in a different aspect compared to the other two that spoke before me. So my take on Model United Nations as an activity is that other than just learning all these skills like public speaking, research, and like diplomacy, all these things, other than this, what I find that is the most interesting about this activity is you actually get to meet people from other institutions. Because when you take part in conferences hosted by other institutions, you will meet people from other institutions and other enthusiasts of MUN as well. And this is actually a very good opportunity for students to engage in things like networking. And it's also kind of related to the activity itself as well, because when you are in a council, one of the skills that you need to develop is lobbying. So, you know, it's kind of like two birds in one stone. You go to a conference, go to a council, you learn to lobby within council, and at the same time you also network with people, you meet people, and that's how you get exposure to the community of MUNers, people who do MUN in Malaysia.
My take on this is I do share sentiments with everybody here, but on the notion of whether the Model United Nations is simply an extracurricular activity, if one had to answer this question on the fundamental basis, is it an extracurricular activity? There is no question it is. Many people, I would imagine, would like to say in a more altruistic way, I suppose, that, oh, it's more than an extracurricular activity. But I think a more proper way to phrase it is, it's out of this extracurricular activity, what do you build from it? You see, as noted by May, Dhruv, and Tracy, some of the skills we learn, soft skills, lobbying, negotiations, discussing international issues, networking, all these are built from this extracurricular activity. So that is indeed. Model United Nations, I will say it's more of a means to an end, a means to an end. You can enjoy this activity as much as you want, but in the end, it's on what you will learn from it. What is the end of you coming in to Model United Nations? And for example, all of us, presidents and vice presidents alike, we here are leading our respective clubs so that we will be able to share this activity to people, not for the sake of sharing it, but because there's so much to learn. It's a means to end, and we want to share with others this means. It is quite unfortunate, and this would be my final point, it is quite unfortunate that despite I myself agreeing with this as a fundamental, in practice, in reality, from what I've observed and what we have observed as well, all of us here, is that sometimes that might not be the case, unfortunately. How does one put this? In certain circumstances, some people exploit this activity that we so beloved for personal gain or financial gain. It's quite an unfortunate phenomenon. But fortunately, at least here in Malaysia, by and large, fundamentally, many still sincerely embed themselves in the idea that indeed Model United Nations is an activity that we so love and that we learn soft skills, gain new friends, to do what we enjoy in Model United Nations. So that is my take on this particular one. So yeah, I hand it back.
Oh, certainly, and I think that since MUN is also relatively new in the Malaysian scene, our institutions, especially public schools, still revert to archaic tools or archaic means to educate students with these soft skills that have already been mentioned, like public speaking. Debate is still a more conventional form of practicing this skill. With research, conventional homework assignments, again, still the traditional way of practicing these skills. But really, the beauty of MUN lies in its ability to encompass and entangle all of these forms into one singular activity, making it so much more, cost efficient, to equip students with, these soft skills, knowledge of global politics, etc.
Let's have a follow-up on that question, right? So you guys mentioned that how so much more comprehensive Model United Nations is. So why is it not as popular as Toastmasters or debate in university level?
Yeah, I think this is a phenomenon that I find really, really striking, because I don't know about other clubs, but in Sunway in particular, a very, very very small percentage of our members actually come from the university level, and I think it's simply because of the reputation that MUN has, in Malaysia at least, as a high school activity. And also it is rather time consuming because with conferences, they can take up to 3 days, sometimes even 4 days. And so it's no longer desirable for students at that level with not much, free time to spare on extracurricular activities. So yeah, with debate, I mean, as far as I know, you can enter a one-day tournament and emerge victorious just like that, or at least, get to, there is a standard of comparison, a very, very distinct one. But with Model United Nations, the 3-day conference, your abilities during these 3 days is evaluated solely by your peers. And I think that makes it less of a desirable activity for mature graduates.
I'd like to add on something very interesting said by May is perception. And that is very important. Why is it not as comprehensive as we would like in Malaysia? For example, May has mentioned that in some way, it's seen as a pre-U type activity, while in many other communities, it's seen the other way around, where it's seen as a university level activity. So different areas have different perceptions, but let us dissect perception a bit more. And I think that May pointed out something very right, which is how people perceive Model UN. You see, oftentimes, because of the standards that Model United Nations has itself as, for example, Model United Nations is a simulation of the United Nations, and any lay person will imagine diplomats wearing business suits, negotiating for hours, having professional talks, etc. And especially to the lay person, where they just want to, I suppose, have a fun time, I will put it as such, it will put them off. I'll put it that way. And politics often is quite a daunting subject to take on, because there are many factors at play here, from various fundamental rights to the rights of nations, and etc. And that's what pushes people off. And that causes that's one of the reasons why its popularity isn't as how we would like it to be. But I'd also like to add on, it's another reason I would imagine why Model UN is not as popular as it is. It's because, how does one put this? It is commonly said that during, I believe, 2019, if my memory serves me right, that the government of the federal government recognized Model United Nations as a extracurricular activity. And that caused a stream of interest, and everybody began to organize Model United Nations conferences. So one would imagine, from the face value, this should be a good thing, right? People are organizing Model UN conferences. But it backfired, because these people attempting to organize it ground up, many with no experiences, I would imagine, making conferences that are, I would just say, questionable quality, and it puts off people who join it, who after joining it, and if such a bad experience is what Model United Nations is in terms of their perception, they will not like to continue. So the key here is, very importantly, perception. And many places, and there are many things that lead to the unique perceptions. And two of the biggest ones that I have pointed out, I believe, and I think is quite important, is what Model United Nations fundamentally is to the layperson, which is, diplomats being professional, talking about world issues at the top level, and also people actually experiencing Model United Nations, but feeling put off from it. And then for those who are very much had a lot of fun in it, who learned a lot, they will come back because they perceive it to be a very productive activity. So that's my take on it.
I completely agree with you, Daniel. But like, in terms of like softening the negative perception around MONMUN, I don't see the reason why MUN can't be sort of integrated into the curriculum. Why does it have to be extracurricular? Why can't it be slowly, gradually integrated into the curriculum? Why can't it start off as informal, as a debate style thing, and then sort of mature into a formal MUN? And this would help sort of people, change their perceptions, maybe soften their stance on how MUN is seen as very diplomatic and all. It is diplomatic, definitely, but it can also be very enjoyable experience. So I personally think that what's the issue with universities or schools slowly, gradually integrating MUN into the curriculum as a sort of as a subject, because I think it's extremely essential for us at the moment, the new generation, being able to speak, articulate points and arguments, be able to, make connections, make friendships. Those things are important, not just, in school and university level, just in general. In the world, is extremely important to have these soft skills. So I think I don't see a reason why it should not be integrated into the curriculum, I think.
Well, while I agree with your sentiment, I find that to make that a practical thing will prove to be difficult, because if, let's say, for me personally, I came from a government school background from my secondary education, and debate itself, although it was already like pretty recognized in school, it was still considered an extracurricular or co-curricular activity. So if we want to basically push MUN forward to be like at the same level as debate, or even better than it will have to get there first, to first be a co-curricular or extracurricular activity. That's my first point. As for my second point, it is that if the government, the Ministry of Education, were to push forward such a subject to be taught within schools and make it compulsory and things like that, I would imagine there will be considerable dissidence coming from the parents, because the parents will come forward and say, why are you teaching my kids these things? These are not STEM fields, because, obviously, as Malaysia is an Asian society, a lot of parents are still more inclined to having their children learn STEM subjects or other kinds of subjects that they would think that it's more relevant and more practical, such as like law or accounting. So based on these factors, I would say it's very unlikely we'll be able to do something like that, where we'll be able to achieve having Model United Nations to be a subject within the curriculum itself.
Yeah, I'll just like to go back to the question real quick and follow up with a point made by Daniel on perception. And I think that another very influential factor, affecting perception is, authority figures or higher up figures. And I think that with the unfortunate lack of retainment in the Malaysian Model United Nations scene, we don't have so many of those, influential figures anymore, at least within public universities. They're all either graduates far removed from Model United Nations or studying abroad in other universities. And because of this, we don't, students are not, students, especially those in universities, are not pressured by high school students or influenced by high school students to participate in Model United Nations, thus lending to it the reputation of being a pre-university sort of extracurricular activity. Within, SUNMUN Model United Nations, because the vast majority of its executive committee is comprised of pre-university students. We don't really get much of a say when it comes to university affairs. We don't get to promote the club in university events. And because of this, we are also, relatively looked down upon by university students. In that sense, I don't know whether that's the case in Taylor's or Monash. I'd like to hear from Tracy and Daniel on this as well.
Well, because Monash is at a university level itself, so our members are naturally like from Monash and our university students. As for our pre-university level students, they're actually studying in SUNMUN, because the pre-university level is the Monash Foundation year, or otherwise more commonly known as MAFI. And those students are currently studying in SUNMUN. So chances are, if these air quotes Monash students are interested in Model United Nations at that level, then chances are they'll likely enter the SUNMUN Model United Nations club instead, and maybe they'll join there first, and eventually when they do come into Monash, then they will join our Model United Nations club.
In Taylor's Lakeside campus, for our club, It's, well, as we know, Taylor's Lakeside campus comprises of both Taylor's University and Taylor's College. So we do have a pre-U and U level. Interestingly, indeed, we do seem to have a similar demography trend where the executive committee, or here as it's called the EXCO BOD, executive committee / board of directors, it is indeed predominantly pre-U students, actually, indeed, foundations and A levels taking a bunch of it. I would imagine it's more of a case of correlation instead of causation. At least to my knowledge, at least in Taylor's, at least to my knowledge, I don't see that there's a perception, oh, TLMUN is a college level activity, or a activity that's not open to university students. It still is most certainly seen as the type of activity that's very professional, very diplomatic, very high level. But in terms of the divide between college or university, I would imagine that's more of a coincidence, unless there's some deep underlying forces at play here. But unless proven otherwise, I would imagine, at least in Taylor's, it's more of a correlation, more of a coincidence. I'll put it that.
Right, I completely forgot that MCKL also has its own pre-university program. So Dhruv, if you'd like to provide some insight as well.
It's mainly pre. I think like our clubs are mainly very student-led, and maybe you could say that, you know, because of COVID, probably, I think just general interests in participating in extracurricular clubs, etc., has sort of, you know, gone down quite a lot, especially since COVID, and everything's gone online because of that. So I think it could only be, it's probably because of, you know, the circumstances that we're currently living in, that you know, just general interest for not just MUN, I think clubs in general, extracurricular clubs in general, has gone down because people don't seem to find, you know, online meetings, Zoom meetings very you know, very attractive in that sense. So I think that's why it's more of a sort of what's happening now is the reason that, you know, general interest is quite low right now.
Okay, so I think we can conclude it there. So let's just move on to the next question. So since we talked about the decreasing in general interest, so the next question is, has model United Nations in Malaysia reached its lowest point during the pandemic?
Okay, so this would be my take. Has model United Nations, actually I'm more accurate, had model United Nations in Malaysia reached its lowest point since the pandemic? And my answer would be yes. But the very fact that I changed has to had is significant, because that implies that the quote unquote, as we call it, the lowest point occurred in the past. It is not currently in the present. And I very much share the sentiment as Dhruv as well, in which COVID-19 had derailed a lot of clubs' plans, and that definitely shocked the United Nations quite in particular. So in early 2020, when in Malaysia, when then Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin announced the movement control order the first time, it was quite a shock. And well, no, not in the sense that we were surprised, but in the sense that for clubs, it meant that all our activities had to be shut down right there and then. And we did not know how long MCO will last. So as time went by, clubs started to transition towards online platforms. And by then we could see a recovery rate. But at that point of time, even before MCO, there is this general perception that model United Nations has been going downwards for quite some time. Many institutions had organized conferences 2018, 2019, but they were no longer in 2020, completely unheard of ever since. So it's been going downwards ever since. And one would often say 2020 and COVID-19 more specifically was a nail in the coffin. It really was. And those who did survive it were few in number. I think that goes for all institutions. But thankfully, as proven by the fact that we are all here, thankfully, model United Nations has indeed come out from precarious situation. And of course, it's not to say that model United Nations somehow saved the whole of Malaysia. I would imagine some institutions are still struggling. But nevertheless, thankfully, as we have already adapted to the situation, we'll be able to go ahead. We'll able to go above one point. Of course, people like to say, we're at our lowest point. Well, if you're at the lowest point already, the only direction is up. And that's how we all are indeed going forward. So that would be my take. Yes, model United Nations had reached its lowest point during the COVID pandemic. But thankfully, that lowest point is over. And now it's a recovery stage. And how well we will recover will truly depend on us entrusted in positions of power in our own Model United Nations clubs and societies to bring our members into Model UN, politics, international relations, and to discuss world issues. And that is why it is very much in our hands on whether this recovery will be a strong one or a sluggish one. So that would be my take.
I think that, yeah, COVID-19 also definitely caused MUN to lose much of its attraction to newer members because of the inability to interact with other delegates in a physical setting. So definitely many people were put off by this, and online conferences, as much as they tried to cover the disparities between the physical realm and the digital realm, there was still an absence of real interaction and the social fun that was attached with the MUN name in Malaysia. So yeah, I mean, because of this, we were at our lowest point, but I do agree with Daniel in that we are approaching, a relatively fast recovery. I think we are still, stuck with online conferences for the time being, but I believe that by the end of the year or even, Q1 of 2022, we will be able to see more physical conferences in the Malaysian scene.
I completely agree. And also, I think there's sort of been a gap in terms of support provided to sort of international schools per se and those of local schools. I think from personal experience, I was fortunate enough to go to an international school where, the sort of ecosystem between international school institutions was very strong. So whenever, organizing MUN events, there'd be a lot of a lot of people are attracted by that because there's sort of a big event, sort of like a showcase event, it would be very well advertised by the school. So surrounding international schools, like several students would come across. We have hundreds and hundreds of students coming in for like a 2 to 3 day event. Some people staying over in hotels just to attend the event. So I think in that sense, in terms of international schools, it was very attractive. And it was sort of like a festival sort of thing, there's food, there's stalls, but the whole center point was the debate, the MUN was the whole center stage. So I think in that sense, not just during COVID, but I think in general sense, there's been a gap in terms of the general support provided and the general sort of attractiveness in terms of international school institutions and also those of local schools.
So in terms of what was happening to the Model United Nations Club of Monash, I would say what went down was slightly different. So as Daniel had said earlier, MUN was already on a decline even before the pandemic. And what made it worse was the pandemic itself and how everything shifted online. But it wasn't actually because the conferences and also our club meetings have shifted online that made the situation bad at Monash, because it's more of we don't even have enough people to, in a way, spread the good word of MUN to in the first place because of the pandemic. So usually every semester there will be this thing called the CNS week or the Club and Societies week, where we can actually advertise to students throughout the period of the entire week, what kind of clubs there are at Monash, how they can join, and things like that, and what they do. But that usually takes place face-to-face, and it will be held somewhere near the entrance of like our campus. So a lot of students will pass by, they'll see something that catches their eye, and then they would be interested to sign up. But because things shifted online, the students here at Monash, a lot of them don't even know what clubs they can even join in the first place. When it comes to clubs and societies, they don't know. Although the university student body, student association, they actually did have these initiatives, which is a virtual CNS week where clubs can take turns to kind of present and show students what clubs they can join. I would say it was very ineffective in a sense, because not a lot of students take part in that as well. Meaning, even me as a student, I did not receive any news or emails telling me that, oh, you can check this thing out to find out what clubs you want to join. A lot of people didn't know about this, and that's why we couldn't get enough people to be interested in MUN in the first place, because we don't have enough people coming into the club in the first place.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like the means of communication just wasn't there. There's no ability to sort of notify people or remind people, oh, hey, there's a club going on. That was one thing. And also the other thing would be sort of, as it was virtual, you know, the only way we could sort of showcase our clubs would be through presentation. And so, you know, people are bored enough with presentations as it is in school when learning subjects, you know, having, you know, another presentation again, albeit, you know, it's just 10 minutes, but again, you know, presentation formats are not very attractive in general to people, you know, they like something to be more interactive, more, obviously it can't be physical because it's Zoom or it's virtual, but something more exciting. So people are sort of like, oh my God, I want to attend this club. I want to see what this is about. So I think people in our position, I think we can also be more innovative in the sense, you know, making things more interesting in some way. I'm not sure, not exactly sure how, but find creative ideas to sort of attract people, you know, what makes people want to do something, you know, I think that we have to figure that out, I think.
I'd just like to add on, because when we think about this, right, when we say what we say, that, especially from what Tracy has mentioned, which is being unable to get members to begin with. Because when Tracy, when you said that, right, I felt in particular for college level institutions. Foundation, 1 year. A-levels, 1.5 years. Diploma, I don't know. But the point is, one semester just passes like that, and then you get an opportunity to get more members. But suddenly, you are unable to get members. Maybe because the institution didn't facilitate a clubs and societies week, or ECNS Day, as here it's called in ALIS. If there's no such thing, a whole semester is lost. And that means many members, seasoned members, or even committee members might have graduated by then. And then the club ends up being a shell of itself. On the university level, luckily, courses are normally 3 to 4 years. So normally that's not a concern. But one would imagine it's quite painful for college level institutions. So it's quite a how does one put this? Unfortunate circumstances for college level institutions. But Dhruv, maybe you could share like how has, I believe in MCKL it's called All Clubs Day. Could you like share with us on how was it during the pandemic era?
Yeah, I mean, you know, we do get notified of emails, okay, like, okay, on this day there'll be an All Clubs Day, but sort of because we receive so many emails, it sort of, you know, goes down the list. So you sort of, where's the email going, you know, that kind of thing as well. And so that's one thing. And in terms of the All Clubs Day, we get about 5 to 10 minutes to present, and the time when we get to present, it's not very facilitating to people that want to sort of tune in. So it's like between 5 to 7, and I personally don't think that's a great time, because I don't think people are active or online at those particular times, especially not me. You know, I'm not active online between those times. So I think even the timing sort of don't help with sort of attracting people in general to sort of tune in to the All Clubs Day. I think that's one thing. And there's also like there's a massive variety of clubs. I think sometimes there's too many clubs, you know, there can always be too many clubs. There's like 40, 50 clubs, you know, and they're all sort of, they have their own nuances, their own sort of specific, you know, bits about them. So I think having too many clubs also, I think, can be a problem, because then, you know, our All Clubs Day lasted it was around 2 days, I think, because there's so many clubs we had to do for 2 days. I think it was like 5 to 7 and then 5 to 7. So, and about 5 to 10 minute sessions for each club. So I think having that was sort of scattered around, I think it made it quite unattractive for people to sort of tune in the first place. You know, having to know, okay, what time is this club going to be on? What time is this club going to be on? So I think that made it sort of quite tedious in the sense, and people just weren't into it, I think. And also to add to Daniel's point about how, you know, there's sort of a staggered continuity in terms of pre-university level. So like, you know, it's 1.5 years, 1 year. So there's a cycle, you know, and there's no smooth transition. Even us, the committee members in positions of sort of in leadership positions, you know, like I'm only going to be the president for maybe another couple of weeks, and then it's the next people's turn, the next batch. And our batches come in different days. So some the new batch comes in August, some come in November, some come in January. So it's very muddled up. So we sort of can't have a smooth transition of, change between committees and also in terms of members. So I think that's another issue we have, I think.
Okay, so that's very insightful. So I think we can end this question here. So for the final question is that model United Nations should embrace absolute freedom of speech. What do you guys think?
I partially agree, not because it's really my opinion, but it's actually more of to be safe in a sense, because I wasn't sure what exactly was the conference. But if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, if any of you know about this, I think it was Penang MUN some years ago, where they were discussing something related to terrorism, or was it some situation in Malaysia, and they were visited by the police and things like that. Yeah. Daniel, do you know more about this?
I wish I knew more.
You wish you knew more. Yeah.
I wish I knew more.
Yeah. So this is the gist of what I know. So in that sense, we actually do have certain issues, even from like Monash itself, like the administration, that they don't allow us to discuss about certain things because they deem it to be too controversial. And because we also bear the Monash name, we cannot discuss certain things in order to not get into trouble, like, with the authorities and the police and things like that. As for the topics in question, like during debate, whether or not we should embrace freedom of speech, I think, honestly, even when it comes to certain harsh things you need to say in the council itself, or like criticisms, I don't think like there's anything stopping you from saying it, but as long as it's said diplomatically, I don't see an issue. As long as it's tactful, there should be no issue.
I agree to an extent. I personally think that model United Nations should embrace absolute freedom of speech, but that's sort of in a utopian world. In an ideal society, yes, we all want to have complete freedom of speech, obviously, but that's just not the case in reality, especially in Malaysia, quite a conservative nation, and also, as Tracy pointed out, sort of holding, we are representing our universities, so the reputations of our universities or colleges are at stake. So I think we have to sort of tread the water lightly, sort of be careful in that sense. But personally, on a personal level, I think controversial topics and controversial issues should definitely be discussed, because you sort of, because the reason that issues are controversial is because one side or the other hasn't completely understood it. That's what makes things quite controversial, because there's not an appropriate or good enough understanding of that issue. I think to sort of decontroversialize those issues, I think being able to debate them on a stage, with people with differing opinions, I think that helps to decontroversialize it. That helps people to understand it better, and also I think that it makes for good debate. When you have controversial topics, it makes for people want to join in to have their say. However strong their opinion might be, but they want to have their say on those certain topics. I think on the personal level, yes, I think we should definitely have absolute freedom of speech, but in reality, I don't think that will be the case.
Yeah, I think that we can still, retain the essence of Model United Nations without having to debate, very, very controversial topics that would abuse freedom of speech in that sense. And with SUNMUN Model United Nations, all of our council topics have to be submitted to our teacher advisors, who in turn will send it to approval by the board. So we have a very, very strict but also obscure line that we have to toe when it comes to writing these council topics, and ensuring that while they are controversial enough to spark a good debate during sessions, they remain free of too much controversy that would attract the attention of the board or the Malaysian government. But yeah, I feel like in general, although we would like to embrace freedom of speech, especially in councils like the UNHCR, which would necessitate it, we can still spark good debate without having to cross cross any line implemented by our respective institutions.
And I'd like to share my thoughts. And first and foremost, when it comes to the administration of the club or conference, I 100% agree with May, Dhruv, and Tracy here, which indeed we have to tread the waters very carefully, because rightfully, number one, trouble with the authorities, and or trouble with the management, because after all, we do represent our institution, especially in the community of Model United Nations. But onto Model United Nations, the spirit of it, whether it should embrace absolute freedom of speech. My take on it, if we were to define absolute freedom of speech, meaning as anything can say whatever you want without consequences, I cannot agree fundamentally, because that will include death threats, that will include deliberately sparking some problems, I'll put it that way. So I fundamentally believe one key way to ensure that we want to maximize freedom of speech. We want everybody to share ideas, no matter how controversial, so that we can always have a good discussion and so on. But as I believe one of you said quite rightfully, it has to be done diplomatically. That is the fundamental key. So do I believe in absolute freedom of speech? I do not believe so. I say this as an individual. I believe there will always be some slight limit, while we should always push for it, but there will always be slight limit. But in any situation, for the spirit of Model United Nations, whose goal is to have ideas discussed, have ideas be discussed, debated, and find the best ideas to be put forward, it must always be done diplomatically. That's the bottom line. So in summary, when it comes to clubs, we all agree, we all unanimously agree, we must always be a bit careful. We don't want to get in trouble. But in terms of the spirit of Model UN, for me, there must always be a limit. And regardless of whatever is said, it must be done diplomatically. After all, we're all here, we want to be future leaders in our industries, in the country, or perhaps the whole country. And we must always be able to articulate and discuss ideas with people who we may not necessarily agree with. It's a diverse world. We may not necessarily agree with certain people, but we can most certainly have a good conversation and to learn more about one another. So that would be my take.
But actually, okay, so let's have a question to follow up. So you guys are like organizers of these conferences, right? So I assume that most of you, of course, definitely everyone loves some controversial stuff or to discuss a very a controversial topic. So do you guys have that? So how do you guys do it? So do you guys fight for it to be allowed by administration to have this kind of controversial topic, or has it already been shot down so many times that let's just stick with the safe route?
For Sunway, I don't know about other institutions. We have a very, very lengthy administrative approval process. There's so much bureaucracy attached to getting these events approved that we would rather play safe rather than have to wait for constant approval from authorities.
Yeah, same here. It's quite a rigorous approval process as well. So we sort of play it safe. And also, the recent sort of political correctness, sort of the PC culture at the moment, I think also contributes to it. Sort of even a slight bit of controversy in a certain topic, maybe we talk about abortion, etc., or in certain nations. I think we sort of avoid those topics because, firstly, it's a rigorous approval process, as was mentioned, and also it takes time to sort of to get it approved. We don't have that time because semesters go by quite quickly. So we'd rather keep it safe and sort of talk about topics that are currently happening in the world. So yeah.
For TLMUN, I suppose we are somewhat more well off because thankfully, for us, we would just send the proposal for approval by our club advisor, and generally speaking, as long as it does not clash with any potential clashes with the authorities, then generally it will be approved. But once again, as noted as before, we represent the institution. So very much whatever topic we put, it can be controversial. Often we have, and that's what we always aim towards, but not to the extent that it would jeopardize the institution and our club as a whole. So in a sense, we have more leeway in that sense. So that's the experience TLMUN does have.
Yeah, and for MUN, we basically also try our best not to set topics that we know the admins, the Monash admins will shoot down, because we also have quite a bureaucratic process when it comes to approving these events and things like that. We have to submit the proposal, they will look through it, and then that will also take time. And so we always tend to just, choose the topics that are interesting and also, within the set limits at the same time.
Okay. So I think that's all. So we can have a bit of a break, and then let's have a small closing remark. So does anyone want to have like few words at the end?
We hope that this episode of Spotlight has very much been insightful to all our viewers, that we were able to share experiences across 4 institutions: Taylor's Lakeside Campus, Sunway University and Sunway College, Monash University Malaysia, and Methodist College of Kuala Lumpur. Even though we are from different institutions, even though we have different experiences, even though we have different practices, in the end, we are all under Model United Nations, the very extracurricular activity that we so love. So we hope that this has been insightful. That will be all from me.
So first of all, thank you to TLMUN and its organizing team for inviting me here. It's a pleasure to be here and to be able to talk about like our experiences of dealing with Model United Nations, as well as dealing with some of the issues that we have encountered while we are leading the club, as well as our respective conferences. And I hope that just from being here and sharing my experience, this proved to be enlightening to anyone that's watching this right now.
Yeah, I share the same sentiments as Tracy. Thank you so much to TLMUN for taking the liberty to organize this and for inviting me here. I believe that this was a great opportunity to strengthen our interclub relations, and being able to discuss and exchange experiences really enlighten me on certain dichotomies and as well as similarities that our clubs and institutions share. So I hope that knowledge of these have also helped our listeners to better understand the Malaysian MUN scene and hopefully engage themselves more in MUN.
Yeah, same here also. Thank you to the TLMUN team for sort of inviting me in. I think I feel extremely privileged to sort of represent my club and also represent the MUN scene in that sense. So I hope, this discussion has been sort of insightful and sort of encouraged fellow listeners to sort of, give MUN a go. I think it's sort of like a whirlpool. When you dive in, there's a lot of things to explore. So I definitely think, and I definitely hope that the listeners sort of, push themselves as well, in the personal level that way, and also sort of help to extend and sort of persuade others to potentially join the MUN ecosystem.
Okay, so thank you everyone for watching, and also thank you once again on behalf of TLMUN for all the guest speakers from taking their time to attend this episode of Spotlight. So once again, we hope that to everyone who's watching the video, those are inside of the MUN scene, get to know more on like how the organization behind each conference is, and maybe those people that are outside of the MUN scene that watching this episode can have an interest and maybe reach out to these clubs if you are interested at all. So once again, thank you all for watching.